So, how many times have you been in a group of experienced players? How many times has a so-called experienced player messed up over and over again? Now, how many of those times has that occurred in the King's Fall raid? I can almost guarantee that the number of failures you've had per run has grown dramatically from the last two raids since the introduction of King's Fall, making King's Fall look more difficult. Why is that? Well, it simply comes down to Bungie trying to challenge player expectations. King's Fall isn't harder than the other raids. It is simply different. Compared to Vault of Glass and Crota's End, the other two raids for those unaware, King's Fall has many more puzzle mechanics. This presents an interesting dilemma. The earlier two raids have shooting and minor coordination in the form of callouts, and focusing enemies down with multiple weapons. King's Fall has all that, much stricter time constraints, and intense team coordination. Essentially, the earlier two raids were played by a leader or two out of the six. Said leader simply told people where and when to shoot, while he or she did the minor puzzle mechanics. In King's Fall, however, each player has a very real job, at least for the last two of the four bosses. Before I go any further, of course, let me clarify. The puzzle mechanics in the last two bosses, the Daughters and Oryx, are stupidly simple when you look at them one by one. Longtime Destiny players are likely screaming that fact at this very moment. However, when these puzzle elements are taken as a collective, they become convoluted. In other words, a single leader can neither control everyone's moves, nor can they know all the information at any given time. For the first time in Destiny, players are tasked with being autonomous. But haven't they always been? Players are and have always been autonomous. Take the rest of Destiny's content into consideration. Players very rarely communicate when running through strikes or other non-raid content. Why does that occur? Well, players already know what to do. They can handle themselves, and they don't require help from others in many situations. It isn't the fact that you are being autonomous that is the problem. It's the situation it occurs in. I would like to bring up a theory regarding the subconscious habits players have, the developer-influenced player mindset. King's Fall is an oddity. It literally moves away from what the rest of the game plays like. King's Fall challenges players not primarily through combat, but through its puzzle mechanics. Do me a favor next time you go play a more difficult level in a Bungie game. Say, Heroic difficulty in Halo or the Nightfall in Destiny. Analyze each move you make and the moves of the enemies. Notice the nuances to each enemy, like how the Phalanx puts up its shield and a Thrall's constant charging. Notice how mobile you have to be at certain times. In virtually all of the pieces of content in the game, from the story missions to the strikes to the first two raids, players are simply tasked with decimating everything in their path. Sounds mindless, right? Not really. Bungie first-person shooters are essentially strategy games. Players are worried about hitting the critical points on the enemies, whether there's cover near them, whether they should use their high-powered weapons on this enemy or that one, whether they should try to focus this harder enemy down before the lesser ones surround them, what route to take to get to this area, how many enemies are still alive, what kind of enemies are still alive, and how to attack those enemies. Unlike games like Call of Duty, Bungie FPSs are not simply shooting galleries. I'm not trying to say that Destiny players are dumb, nor am I trying to say that all Destiny content other than the King's Fall raid is mindless. Bungie combat is so in-depth that players are constantly thinking the entire time. No, I'm simply saying that King's Fall contradicts the player mindset Bungie has created. The problem that we face is that players have become so absorbed in this gameplay that they were unprepared for King's Fall. Combat in King's Fall is virtually non-existent compared to the first two raids, Vault of Glass and Crota's End. Throughout all of the bosses, enemies spawn in set orders at set spawns and for set amounts of time. It may as well be a shooting gallery because the enemies in King's Fall are literally only there to stop low-level players from completing the raid or to function as puzzle mechanics themselves. The real challenge of King's Fall is everything aside from the combat, meaning players are having to focus on the puzzle mechanics, not what they've been trained to do for the past year. That is why I think players were and possibly are having trouble with the mechanics in the latest raid. I can only shake my head when players die and don't call it out or explain what role isn't covered. Why don't players have the initiative to leave a less important job, say enemy control, and move to a more important one when the need arises? Why is all of that aforementioned autonomy completely forgotten in so many people? Because King's Fall challenged the player mindset that Bungie has cultivated for the past 2 years, a subconscious mindset of combat, not puzzles. However, despite all this, King's Fall is the best designed piece of content to date. Instead of forcing players to adhere to very strict gear checks, it rewards skill, intelligence, and teamwork. When taking a new player into the raid, the fear is not whether said player can deal enough damage, the fear is whether said player can learn and handle the puzzle mechanics of the raid. Isn't that awesome? I find myself wanting to do the raid. I find myself simply helping out friends despite not getting any rewards. I find myself not caring about the loot I do get. King's Fall is a breath of fresh air because it is determined by the player, not the player's gear, unlike so many MMOs before. Bungie has shown us what a real raid is and should be. The issue is that this piece of content jarred players. Bungie simply forgot to bring them along for the ride. I would like to see this type of content in the future, not just from Bungie, from all developers. However, I do feel that Bungie did not ease players into this new raid mindset. Obviously, the Taken King DLC has been out for months now, and people have learned the raid. However, developers must take into account not only a difficulty curve, but also the curve of gameplay. Otherwise, you run the risk of frustrating customers with mechanics and challenges that entirely contradict the rest of your game. Well, that's the first video. I'm not entirely sure what I want my channel to be, but of course, this assumes someone is actually listening to my rambling. Regardless, I'm going to make this a regular series entitled Discussion for the time being, though my next video may take a while because I can't really work on this full time. The next video in this series will be on how the games industry struck down the latest sandbox, Just Cause 3. If you have any games you would like to have discussed, please email me below. Aside from that, please leave a like and comment. Please share the video as well. If you want to support me in the best way possible, please write me some criticism in the email below. I want this series to be fairly decent in both its content and its delivery. Well, that wraps everything up. This is Shapeless, signing off.